Welcome to the Rethink Leadership podcast with me, Jeremy Blaine. I interview leaders, experts and business professionals from around the world who are bringing leadership principles and know-how into the digitally driven 21st century workplace, with focus firmly on the how-to rather than the what. Each episode is in aid of a charity chosen by my guests, and since 2020, we've made donations to over 80 global and local causes. Following the launch of my most recent book with Dr. Rochelle Haynes, Open HR, the Human Capital Framework for the Blended Workforce, I'm thrilled to welcome John Winsor. He's the visionary founder of Open Assembly, the king of open talent, and a globally recognised leader in the future of work. John, like us, strongly advocates for the leveraging of open talent and freelancing to help organisations worldwide tap into global talent pools for innovation and growth. As an executive in residence at Digital Data Design at Harvard Business School, John also contributes to pioneering research on emerging work models. He's co-authored the bestseller Open Talent, Leveraging a Global Workforce to Solve Your Biggest Challenges, a vital guide for businesses aiming to stay competitive through open innovation. Beyond his writing, John also leads the Open Assembly community, a global network of 4,000 leaders dedicated to transforming workplaces. And I'm proud to say that myself and Rochelle are members. This episode is in aid of the First Responders Foundation in the US as a thank you to John for joining us. This excellent organisation serves in honouring all first responders, veterans and their families, building appreciation and respect for their work and enhancing public safety. Hello, John. Thank you so much for joining me. Please introduce yourself to our listeners. Tell us about your expertise and what you're currently working on.
Thanks, Jeremy. I'm really psyched to be here. You know, as I've had this long career in what I would call open talent. I mean, way back when it was crowdsourcing, and we were always thinking about variable cost solutions to talent more because I was just a bootstrap entrepreneur. I didn't have that choice to do anything else, and it really came out of the beginning when I bought a magazine called Women's Sports and Fitness, and they had 40 editors in New York, and I just couldn't afford to do that. So I decided to actually turn the readers into the authors of their stories and hire a couple editors to rewrite that, and it worked really well. I sold that company to Condé Nast, and kind of set me on this journey of, wow, I wonder if there's a different way to think about how we use talent. And that's been a long career. So I've always really been intrigued by this idea, even though I built companies, not so much in the talent space to advise or to build products for other companies. It was more like, how do I take an industry like magazine publishing or advertising agency industry, and then democratize kind of the expertise and knowledge, and kind of compete on a really fast way. And that's how I got to Harvard. I had a company called Victors and Spoils that we grew really quickly, won a bunch of pretty notable business, and Harvard started following me and did a couple of case studies on me. And I sold that company to Havas and out of Paris. It was really great, but it was super obvious. And that was one of the powers of this case study, is it showed that, most incumbent organizations just aren't ready to adopt to new innovations, and they really struggle. It's really an internal, change. And so now I have a couple of things that I do at Harvard. One is I'm the executive in residence at LISH, the Laboratory for Innovation Science at Harvard. And then also just becoming the executive fellow at D-Cubed, which is the Digital Design and Data Institute, where we have 14 labs that kind of study the future of work. And we're putting together a consortium of companies that are really concerned about this democratization of expertise and how they survive this new age of AI.
Wow. John, is there anything you don't do?
I don't know, man. I like to surf and climb and do all those things too. So, but yeah, I mean, I'm old, just like I'm old, like anybody who gets old or who has the privilege enough to get old, has the ability to kind of have done a couple of things in their lives.
Well, and you're still doing it. I mean, that's the point. And
Thanks.
talking about talking about a lot of the themes that you talk about there, it's the digital world. It's how we're working in a digital world, how we innovate, how we staff our organizations for a digital world, not just
Right.
from a need perspective, but actually in terms of your own journey that you just couldn't afford a permanent workforce, but
Right.
now as more as a benefit. And if I'm right in saying you also, of course, you started the company Open Assembly and you lead
Right.
the
Right.
global Open Assembly community. Can you tell
Mhm.
us a little bit more about that and its purpose and any success stories? Because it relates very strongly to how you just introduced yourself.
Yeah. So I've always been a person that, really firmly believed, I'm a half glass full kind of guy. And so I've always been like, high tide floats all boats, and it's really important to create community. And I'm always for the underdog, right? Like I always like to, I mean, I don't know why, but I'm always kind of relish the opportunity to throw Molotov cocktails at the old system. And it seems kind of odd, right? That I'm at Harvard and, and that's my philosophy. But I've been a bit of a rogue element. And so, you know, I, I think one of the things that happened is we had a conference at Harvard called the Crowd Academy back in 2018, and 100 people came to it, all the best thinkers in kind of what I would say the open innovation, open talent space. And Balaji Bandili from Deloitte, myself, Diane Finkhausen from GE, and Steve Rader from NASA all started having a conversation on a weekly basis. And that grew to about 20 folks, but it was really a closed industry focused process. And then something really magical happened during COVID. Like people really were questioning, what is work and how does work get done and what is remote work? And so we built this kind of global community around that, not so much to, sell things or, make a lot of money, but more to like a safe space for people to come together and have conversations, both, in incumbent organizations struggling with what to do, startups, platforms, and of course, freelancers in the new world of work.
And before I get into more into the open talent piece, is that, of course, that community and that global community, which now is, tells you about how the workforce is shifting, how it's transforming, how organizations are responding. So, what's the data telling us around that, John, from an organizational point of view and how they're responding to it, but also the needs of the workforce and how that's shifting?
Well, I mean, I think there's a couple things, right? It's like if you think about it overall, there's about $3 trillion of labor or of the workforce that is connected to companies either as independent contractors or outsourcing or staffing companies. Let's just say non-employees, right? It's still very bifurcated. I find it really interesting that in some of these areas, like in staffing, there's been a massive, and that's a $650 billion industry. And some of the metrics that I find so fascinating in that industry is, and I just gave a speech at SIA, is that typically for a staffing company, they can fill, if they have a client, they can fill about 50% of the needs of the client with staff. And it takes them 2 months to match talent to task or talent to job. And to me, it's sort of like saying, Jeremy, let's just create an analogy or a thought experiment. It's like you and I are in Boston. I've got a big speech the next day. I spill spaghetti on my jacket. I'm freaked out. It's 2007. I go to this thing that hardly anybody remembers anymore called a yellow pages or telephone book. And I flip the pages open and I find an ad for, the biggest ad, because that must be the most successful company, right? For a dry cleaner. And I go to them. Well, I don't know. Are they still in business? Do they do quality work? Was there a management change, staff change, all those things? Do you know what the phone book, the yellow pages in Boston cost in 2007?
I couldn't even guess, John.
Yeah, so $100 million. So
Wow.
essentially, it cost us collectively $100 million for me to match, for me to have a problem and match a solution. Now it's free, right? Now it's been commoditized, and so my takeaway is like everything is going to be digitally transformed, and now accelerated by AI, and so we're naive to think that the same thing's not going to play out in the matching and connecting to labor. And so, you know, 2 months isn't acceptable. A lot of platforms, if people reside on the platform, couldn't do that in 2 days, or if not even that, like 2 hours, right? So it's a natural progression, digital transformation. The reason things don't change very quickly is that staffing companies have made so much money and they don't want to let go of that. They're an incumbent organization and they don't want to be, like there's that old saying, right? It's hard for companies to trade analog dollars for digital dimes. And I think that's really true in this case as well.
I like that, analog dollars for digital dimes, and I understand that. And I think that's a resistance when we start to see organizations that are butting up against digital stroke whole business transformation as well, is that this immobilization and sometimes complete denial and and apathy and kicking our feet against against the stones is what's slowing everything down. And yet underneath all that, people are getting swept away. And
Yeah.
from what you've explained then there, so who are the movers and shakers who are coming in almost as, beyond disruptors to show these traditional organizations and industries, if you like, how to do it better?
Mm. I think the deal is that, this open talent movement is big but it's still super nascent.
Mm.
Back in the day, I helped Jeff Howe write crowdsourcing, the book in 2006. And we all thought that was the tipping point. Those of us have been doing the work for 25 years. What's intriguing to me is that, this kind of human to human battle, that the incumbent organizations have done a really good job of saying, oh, well, that might not be compliant. And what about taxes and security and legal, all those kinds of things. And it's definitely slowed the movement down, right? It's definitely been difficult. I think what you're seeing now is that with this kind of easily accessible, democratized expertise, what you're seeing is that especially with AI, you're seeing that just become ubiquitous. So some of the numbers that I was talking to the CMO of a large manufacturing company, really well-known European manufacturing company, and he was saying that, in 2 years he's gone from he has to create renderings for his customers, putting their logos on his machinery and showing them pictures. So in 2020, that cost $4,000 to do, a beautiful render with the right technology. Even digital, using digital tools. He transformed that to 2 years ago using open innovation crowdsourcing contests and got it down to $100 per image. So a pretty big drop, 4,000 to 100. He said in the last couple of months, AI can do 95% as good as either the professional render or the crowdsource solution for 25 cents. And so, I think that's the reality. And I think it starts with this mindset shift in organizations. Organizations need to think about not jobs and roles, but really, what are the outcomes that need to happen? And how do I get aligned with the CEO? And then what are the tasks that need to ladder up to those outcomes? And what are the skills I need? And then bifurcate the skills between human skills and synthetic skills.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And in some ways, just going back a step to what you said, when you consider this more open approach to talent, innovation, etc., plus digital acceleration with generative AI, etc., etc., and then the next steps of what that's going to be. Does that almost, in your mind, transcend a lot of the more traditional mindset issues of compliance, tax, remuneration, because they've kind of gone past that?
I agree with that. I think that's exactly right. What's that famous quote? If you don't like change, you'll like irrelevance even less.
Yeah.
And I think that's happening quickly. I mean, I just was reading the numbers from Klarna that I hadn't read before. I don't know why, but earlier this year, in a month, they created an AI that essentially did the work in 1 month of 700 people, and it's something simply built on top of OpenAI, and generated $40 million of profit by that savings in 1 month. And so I think you're seeing, a lot of companies are going to be really threatened by this stuff. I mean, I think what you'll see in the short run is that the best companies will use this for productivity, and the productivity gains are going to be, awe-inspiring. But I think in the long run, we're going to face a lot of social issues. How are we going to pay for, if people don't have a job, then what's their identity, and then what's their economic opportunity, all those kinds of things.
That's maybe a symptom of the speed that it's moving at as well, is that has to come on the top of the agendas now, and thinking about what are the frameworks to manage the workforce, regardless of its designation, whether I'm permanent or open or based in Bangalore or
right.
Pittsburgh, etc. And that's where I think, again, speed, and that speed of irrelevance or speed of relevance on the flip side of it is absolutely key. So maybe if I come to that talent point just specifically, and having been personally inspired by your book, John, Open Talent, which is leveraging a global workforce to solve your biggest challenges, maybe for those tuning in that are new to this, just help us by defining what open talent means. And again, reinforcing why it's such an important time for organizations and leaders to sit up and take note.
Yeah, no, I think that thanks. I love that. So open talent to us is this digital transformation of talent practices. So if you think about it, that, as we talked about both internal and external talent, and you think about internally, then certainly we advocate for digital transformation of HR through internal talent marketplaces, right? How do we create a way to give employees the ability to control their own destiny by saying, hey, Jeremy, great job. You might be interested in some other things. Here are some other opportunities. Here's some upskilling opportunities. We really love you. We hate for you to leave. And so maybe the better thing to do is to really focus on that. And so I think that's really the first start of it. Right. So if we think about internal talent marketplaces as a solution for HR, or let's just say not a solution, but a digital transformation of HR, then what we look at, for the staffing and outsourcing industry is really, what's a solution? How do we look at that in a more modern digital way? And we look at it as from kind of external talent clouds. Mm-hmm. So, and I think that our framework, I mean, that was the goal of Open Assembly, right? Is like, we know that there are these modern folks, and I'm always for the underdog and for the modern solution. And so how do we help create common language and common process? So the first step is an internal talent marketplace that addresses the digital transformation of staffing. The second one, or of HR, the second one is really external talent clouds, to think about connecting in a new way that will be a digital transformation of both outsourcing and staffing. And what we're seeing is that mindset works both with human and synthetic labor, that you can start thinking about that way. And then the third leg of the open talent stool is really open innovation capabilities. And so open innovation capabilities really comes out of our work at NASA, at LISH, Laboratory for Innovation Science at Harvard. And I think if you have this open talent perspective, my inclination is to think about, well, I'm always concerned about what's the context. So if we have those three legs of the stool, well, how do we change our mindsets, right? And so I think if you look at the NASA example, it's probably a great example. So here's two mindsets, right? If you're at NASA, there's two ways you could look at the world. One is that you could say, I'm NASA, I've got 17,000 full-time employees, most innovative people in the world. And that's a fine mindset, right? Get some things done. It's awesome. With the work we've done at Harvard and NASA, essentially the mindset that we've helped shift is that NASA is not a place-based organization. It's actually a networked organization. And what I mean by that is the perspective of, I have 17,000 full-time employees, but they're digitally connected with a platform called NASA at Work with my 30,000 suppliers or contractors. So the contractors can look at open innovation challenges. And then we have a thing called COSI, which is the Center of Excellence for Collaborative Innovation. And COSI taps into 40 platforms that represent 200 million people. So you could say, I'm a place-based organization with 17,000 people, or I'm a networked organization with the ability to work with 200 million, 47,000 people. I don't know about you, but I certainly would love the resources of 200 million, 47,000 people instead of 17,000 people. But I think it starts at that mindset shift, right? And now that number is, really to infinity because of AI.
Yeah, and it's a great example that, and a good way because I'm sure you come across this with the way I look at it. There's a 20th century mindset and there's a new 21st century mindset when I'm talking to organizations, boards, and
I know.
leaders.
Yeah.
And in order to make that shift, you are absolutely right. It is that mindset. It's breaking that mindset so that they can become aware first and absolutely acknowledge the possibilities out here. What are some of the best cases? You've talked about NASA. What are some of the maybe the other cases of particularly traditional organizations that have managed to turn themselves around in this way, embracing sort of the open in inverted commas credo, and what have been the benefits?
It's interesting, right? I think we're still, I mean, we lay out this kind of framework in the book from assess to learn, to experiment,
Uh-huh.
to build and to scale. And what we find is that we don't find so many examples of scaling. Like essentially, I mean, we have lots of startups examples, right, that do a great job of working remotely with freelance teams. But from big organizations, it's just too hard for them to make that change. One of my favorite examples lately is, if you think about it from internal talent marketplaces, is is this company called SEI, which is a large software wealth management software company. And the thing I love about SEI is they tried some open innovation platforms and it didn't really work. The challenge was is that their software is really nuanced. And one of the things that, their team's very focused on creating the base software. All their clients globally kept pounding them for, I need an API. I need this kind of, stuff built into my system. And there were lots and lots of things. There were lots of frustration from clients because there were lots of stuff that needed to get done. And like I said, they tried some platforms. It's hard to get up to speed with knowledge. I was really proud of this guy, Sanjay Sharma, who's the CTO. Now he runs their biggest business unit. Essentially, he did something really simple and curious. He just said, I wonder if there's some cognitive surplus inside my organization. Instead of implementing a large kind of, SaaS software platform to collect data and share it, why don't I just create a Excel spreadsheet with all the projects that are open and let me decide on a bounty of what I'm willing to pay for that. And lo and behold, and he turned it over just to his internal teams. Lo and behold, people worked weekends and nights and got 100 projects that were really important for the organization to get done in a couple months. And so he decided to actually expand that, not just to his internal team, but built a little more software and then went out to his retirees and said, hey, here's a list of things. So he tapped into this amazing cognitive surplus of folks that just left the business after 25 years, right? What a wonderful thing. The third step was he went to his suppliers, a couple of the big outsourcing companies, and said to them, hey, we've had a long-term relationship. I'm going to rewrite the contract so that your employees can actually play on the open talent platform and do, projects. But you've been working on our software for a while, but I want, your employees, whether they're based in Kenya or in India, to be able to earn extra money by figuring stuff out. Now, the key to this system, I think, that he's created is that they are pretty liberal on the educational budget. They give each employee $1,800. And they've really encouraged people to pool that money together and do some group team problem solving. So let's just say in the data science area, new software is created, Snowflake, let's say. There's not a lot of skills inside SEI with that, Snowflake developers. His encouragement is, here are 5 or 6 projects we need to get done in Snowflake. Why don't you guys advocate and go take your training money, go learn those skills and go write the code and win this money, instead of him going through this arduous process of how do I hire? What's the job description? How do I do that? So I think that's interesting, but they're right on the cusp of doing something really fascinating. That is, they have so much trust with their clients. They're saying to their clients, hey, why don't you put up your own needs onto our open talent platform and put your own bounties up, and our community, our retirees and employees and our external cloud can do work for you. Now to me, it's a huge shift of what an organization is. Is an organization an entity that is kind of exists uniquely in the world, and you have to go through the front door to kind of scope the work and get the work done? Or is it a platform that's just matching talent to task? Like, clients have a problem. I have a bunch of really smart people in my office. I'm building the core platform. But for anything else, why aren't I just matching the talent to the task? Like that's not my core business, but it helps accelerate it, right? It makes it really sticky for clients. I think that's kind of the best case study I've seen lately on this.
It's really interesting when I go to clients as well. We're talking about transforming, and whether you're in the legal sector, the insurance sector, finance, or whatever, is that the key question really is these days: are you a bank doing this, or are you a platform that also offers banking but does so much more? And it really can change the mindset in many ways from that point of view. And if you can add so much more value to the client by them being able to access your sort of open talent platform internally and externally, I really get that, John. I think it's that's a fundamental game changer. But there are mindsets that are too stuck in the mud or too big, like you talked about before. You said there's some organizations that perhaps they're still dealing with legacy transformation. It's like, the HR leaders or the business leaders are coming to you and saying, we can't do this, John. What do you say to them?
I know. I wrote this really controversial article back in the day, and one of the things that it was in the advertising business. And there's a really famous advertising show called Cannes. Have you heard of that? It's like the Cannes, creative. It's a huge thing. It's like the biggest thing in advertising. And essentially what transpired was that these big holding companies were holding things back, right? They just didn't want to see it. And so my article I called it the dinosaurs of Cannes. And, it's like, look at these executives. They're actually, walking down the Croisette, which is right next to the beach in Cannes, this fancy boulevard. I was like, look at them. They're like strutting their stuff down the boulevard. It's all these annoying furry things are around their feet, and these feathery things are flying around their heads. And they don't even see it, right? They don't even see that, gone are the days of these dinosaurs. And, that was back in 2013, I think. And, it's come true. And it's nothing that I did brilliantly, but just more. Sorry, my camera keeps going like that. I'm having camera problems today. Sorry about that. It's nothing more than just a natural evolution, right? It's just like, better, faster, cheaper. It's always, that's kind of what happens. Like the people that are more nimble can get to the future. And I think that's really hard for organizations to do. It's almost like we have to create a kind of spirit of, I don't know, a spirit of cooperation, but just humility too. I think that sometimes that those of us that are kind of in the innovation space get really arrogant, like, oh, you dumb old, companies, you can't understand what's really happening. And I think there needs to be more humility and willingness to kind of help those companies get to the future.
But maybe these platforms that you're talking about, this access to platforms, not necessarily of my own, but of my supplier or my client or whatever, is one of the ways forward of doing that. But it also strikes me to go back to something that you said before, that this is why many industries are ripe for innovation and disruption from smaller players coming in to rethink how it's done. And we're seeing it play out day by day, aren't we?
Well, it's funny, right? Because I think we forget the history, right? It's like Facebook and Google, they're both crowdsourced solutions, right? Like Facebook doesn't create any information. It relies on us to create the information. It created a platform for us to communicate and share. Likewise, Google, looks at our behavior and then ranks things accordingly. And so, but yet, I when I was in the magazine business, everybody was convinced that, internet was just a fad, that Vogue's going to own, fashion, no matter what fashion, wherever, people look for fashion. And they got stuck, right? Because essentially what happened in my naive view of things, is that essentially, early on, magazines like Vogue were controlled by amazing editors that could see what the customers needed and could actually create a product that really attracted customers and helped brands sell things. Over time, the two most expensive things in the magazine world were printing the magazine and then also distributing it. So the people that rose to the top of those organizations were people that could do the best job of making money and controlling those expenses. Now, if you're really dedicated personally to putting ink on paper and distributing those, pieces of paper, it's really hard for you to think that this digital thing called the internet is even a competitor, right? It's like, well, that's not our business. Like, we're more worried about the other magazine, right? Who else is putting ink on paper more efficiently than we are? And they forgot about the core reason for even being in business.
Yeah, it's such a great example. And there are more, aren't there? Well, John, it's been such an interesting conversation. I could go on all your day on this one.
Oh, thanks. No,
but thank you so much for being so open and sharing.
Yeah.
And for those tuning in who maybe want to find out more, get involved with Open Assembly, get hold of your book, how do they do all that?
Just come to open-assembly.com. Love to have everybody in the community, in the conversation. I think that's what it's all about. I mean, the future is unknown, and it's going to take all of us to try to figure out what's happening.
What a great way to end. Well, John Winsor, thanks very much for joining me.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for tuning in to the Rethink Leadership podcast with me, Jeremy Blaine. Please like, comment, and support us on your favourite platform, and subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch as well as listen to each episode.